There are those that have seen the future. They've seen our disasters and our wars. For years, these remote viewers were a part of a military research program, accurately foreseeing the outcome of global events. But when they expected to see a future of prosperity, what they saw was our end. Now, the military officer in charge of this top-secret program shatters the silence, revealing to the public what the governments of the world have known all along.
The Norwegian government has finished construction of the Doomsday Vault to protect the world's plant species as sort of a modern-day Noah's Ark. More than 100 countries have backed the project.
To warn you.
Viewers began to pick up on a very large event that at first I thought was a nuclear war.
To prepare you.
Would cause the deaths of millions of people. I don't want to believe it.
To help you survive.
Knowing where to go with your last tank of gas is so important.
The Kill Shot.
Remote viewers. They could be your neighbors, your co-workers, or someone passing you on the street. They can be anyone, or be anywhere. For over a decade, these people have been predicting everything from terrorist attacks to devastating earthquakes with unprecedented accuracy. But they have a secret. The knowledge of an approaching event called the Kill Shot that will change the world as we know it forever. Just what is remote viewing, and what is this global event that they foresee? It all began over 20 years ago in a top-secret government program. In the early 1970s, the public was unaware that the CIA and the United States military launched an aggressive top-secret research program to discover if a protocol could be developed that utilized the inherent intuitive abilities of the human mind for the purpose of war. It was a scientific endeavor that utilized some of the most brilliant military contracted physicists and researchers in the world. They would exhaust the use of every modern tool and study to determine the secret behind extrasensory perception, or ESP. If this ageless phenomenon truly existed and could be controlled, it would change the face of warfare forever. Major Ed Dames was the training and operations officer for the top-secret program.
This tool, remote viewing, had its genesis as a military intelligence collection tool. The CIA and the Army, the Navy to a certain extent, and I, as an intelligence officer, at very high levels of the government, officer, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army level, with all the techniques and methods and tools that we had at our disposal, satellites, agents on the ground, there were just some targets, some programs that were so secret and so classified and so close hold, they were impenetrable to all these systems. So as a tactic of desperation, the Army particularly looked at the potential of psychics and using ESP to collect intelligence.
Secretly utilizing millions of tax dollars, researchers believed they had finally cracked the process to how the human mind obtains and processes unconscious information. Eventually, the positive results of the remote viewing program couldn't be ignored, and real-world targets were issued to the top-secret team.
As the training officer for the unit, I had to be sure that my students, trainees, other fellow officers could remote view anything. For instance, a good example would be, at one point there was a satellite, one of our satellites, a KH-9, picked up a flash off the coast of South Africa. And none of us in the intelligence community really knew what that was. There was no method to go back, play the tape backwards, and to analyze what that was. But remote viewers were able to discern exactly what that was and who did that. It was not a natural event. The results are still classified, so I can't talk about about it anymore. But that's an enigma. That was an enigma we had to turn our attention to and penetrate.
In fact, throughout these remote viewing operations, Major Ed Dames received 3 medals of recognition for matters of national security as the head of the remote viewing program. To this day, the details surrounding the recognitions are classified. Up until this point, trained military remote viewers looked strictly at current-day targets. But intelligence officials and generals wanted to push the viewers even further, to push their minds into the future.
I began to push even forward in time, over the horizon, the future. Can remote viewing, how effective is it against future events? I was looking ahead to see if we could put together an outline for our bosses of events over the horizon. We were particularly interested in military events, not necessarily civil, social and economic events, particularly military. Viewers began to pick up on a very large event that at first I thought was a nuclear war or something geophysically tragic that affected the globe. It took a lot of work, a lot of analysis to collect information about what this huge event was that affects the entire planet too. So we were getting closer to discerning what we were dealing with. We began looking closer at this. We began to sketch a spherical object that was very big. I thought, oh, maybe this is a comet, certainly not a meteor, because it's on fire. And it's the thing that's going to affect this thing, this event that we're picking up in the future. So we did some more work on it. It wasn't a comet. It was big and on fire and right next door in our neck of the woods. It was our own star, the sun.
Specifically, viewers foresaw a series of solar flares that are so powerful they penetrated into Earth's atmosphere, destroying global communications and heating up regions of the world to such an extreme that it would cause the deaths of billions. Our star, man's source of life, would now become our greatest enemy.
Of course we continued this work about, how could we not? And we were concerned about exactly the nature of it, how survivable, if at all, was it? How many would survive and under what circumstances, those kinds of things. And especially, how far out in the future were we looking at? Was this 500 years, 50 years, 5 years, 5 months?
But soon after the discovery of the KILLSHOT event, informational leaks began plaguing the program. The operation became public in the 1990s, and the CIA and US military had no choice but to confirm and declassify its existence. Major Ed Dames followed suit, retiring from military intelligence to pursue civilian remote viewing training and operations. Now that Ed Dames was free to inform the world about the frightening discoveries made during the program, would the world believe it? Would they prepare? Ed Dames wanted to prove that remote viewing worked, that it could accurately peer into the future. It was on the national radio show Coast to Coast AM that he did just that, beginning with a prediction he called the shot across the bow.
So many years ago, we looked ahead at the kinds of things we would be looking at. One was what I called on national radio the shot across the bow, that the sun is going to produce a very large solar flare, a discrete burp that will be very large and be a red flag toward geophysicists and solar physicists. I went on national radio and I said, get ready, this rampage is about to begin. 2 weeks later, the largest solar flare in recorded history happened. It was, luckily, the sun, that particular event was facing away from the Earth because it was at least an X35, some people say X50 or whatever. Point is, it's the solar physicists, atmospheric physicists, had to create a whole new logarithmic band for what they called a mega flare. They had to create a whole new division for something that they never thought that was unprecedented.
In a moment, Major Ed Dames will be here. He's a remote viewer. I know, and I'm sure many of you know, and I'm not going to repeat, but he's a well-credentialed remote viewer who was in the early CIA remote viewing program that the government funded for so many years. I've read his entire military record. He is exactly who he says he is. One of the biggest things he's talked about has been our sun, and that the sun was going to get unpredictably and horrendously active and would first fire a shot across the bow. This is from thenewscientist.com, and the reason I'm going to read this is because a lot of people say, well, you know, Art, the sun has 11-year cycles, and there's nothing unusual about what's going on right now. Oh, are you wrong? Listen carefully. The headline is, Sun More Active Than For a Millennium. The sun is more active now than it has been for a millennium. The realization, which comes from a reconstruction of sunspots stretching back 1,150 years, comes just as the sun has thrown, their word, a tantrum. Over the last week, giant plumes of material burst out from our star's surface and streamed into space, of course causing geomagnetic storms here on Earth, which, in fact, one of them so powerful, the most powerful ever recorded, put our instruments in total saturation for 11 minutes. Satellites out there designed to measure these things, they went into saturation. It went up against a peg and just stayed there. It was so powerful. Today, well, actually a couple of days ago now, when I called him during the intensity of all this, and he said, Art, that was it. That was a shot across the bow.
Just 2 weeks after Major Dame's national radio prediction in 2003, the largest solar flare in recorded history happened. The direction of the flare shot across Earth's path around the sun. If the coronal mass ejection had occurred just 3 months later, the world as we know it would have changed forever. But this would merely be a warning of things to come, a precursor to the kill shot itself. Major Dames revealed even more near-term events that would precede the kill shot. He informed the world on national radio that a new mutated killer crop fungus would soon be discovered in Africa and devastate food supplies, eventually traveling to other regions of the world, Africa, and devastate food supplies, eventually traveling to other regions of the world over the seas to the United States. As time passed, many had forgotten about this prediction, until one day in 2007.
When I read this, as I said on the air, Ed, it stopped me cold in my tracks. Spores that begin in Africa, spread around the world. That sounds an awful lot like what you said.
The spores of which a fungal pathogen would begin in Africa and then migrate. I can't overemphasize the danger of this particular mutant. We said that it would be a mutation.
That is what you said, and it is a mutation.
Even more predictions were revealed on national radio. But this next event was more terrifying than many could have imagined.
I was flabbergasted by the data I got as a result of remote viewing the next X day in Tokyo, because this reactor problem, a reactor breaking, and what I said to the Japanese, I said, and on national radio in my country, this is going to be at least a mini Chernobyl, at least a mini Chernobyl. So again, what I said on national radio in my country, because the Japanese would not want to scare their citizens with this knowledge, was that Japan's going to experience, and when they experience this big earthquake, this next big earthquake, Tokyo will be okay, but this reactor problem will cause at least a mini Chernobyl.
But their breeder reactor is going to break, causing essentially another Chernobyl.
Ed, is that a double containment type reactor?
It is, but it doesn't matter.
How big an earthquake are you talking about?
We're talking about a pretty big earthquake. These reactors in Japan are designed to take earthquakes up to about 7.8 without even breaking.
Right.
And so we're talking about a real catastrophic earthquake, a very big shaker that does not do a lot of damage to Tokyo. We know, for instance, we believe, based upon our work, and have described this for the Japanese viewing audience, the large modern skyscrapers standing.
On March 11, 2011, this tragic prediction came to pass. A massive 8.9 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, resulting in a tsunami that swept across the Japanese landscape, engulfing entire towns. Just as Ed Dames predicted, power plants were damaged, resulting in the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. As the world watched these predictions come to pass, the inevitable question followed. How much time do we have left until the kill shot is upon us?
The time problem is a big bugbear. We can see an event. I used to see loosely. We can perceive big events, all these types of big events, in the future, just like one could see a big mountain range in the future. You can see it ahead, but we don't have the parallax in terms of an analogy. We don't have the parallax vision to adjudge the distance to this big mountain. We can only guess it. There's a very similar situation we have in remote viewing. We can perceive these events ahead, but we can't adjudge the distance in time. So it's still a big problem for us. That's why we had to go through this nut roll about looking at the preceding events that lead up to this huge catastrophic disaster on Earth. When is this going to happen? Because that's the big one. That's the big question. When is it going to happen? So much time has been dedicated by remote viewers, my team and others, individuals, to attempt to discern this. And again, since mind is outside of time, we cannot put a calendrical date on the beginning of this sequence. But what we've done over the years is establish preceding events, large, recognizable preceding events that lead up, that we can see, are dominoes that lead up to the beginning of this kill shot sequence.
Many of these preceding events have already come to pass, including the shot across the bow, the killer crop fungus, and the Japanese disaster. But what else do viewers foresee coming over the horizon?
We picked up the use of a nuclear weapon on the Korean Peninsula by the North Koreans, and this event would be one of the last events that humans recognize before the kill shot sequence begins. We haven't seen that yet.
This prediction was revealed years ago to the public on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. At the time, the nation had zero nuclear capability, and the notion that they would use a nuclear weapon as an act of war was widely believed to be absurd.
As time went on, the idea and the first nuclear test happened in North Korea. That got the attention of a lot of people who had heard my prediction, saying, "Uh-oh, I hope he's not right. That was just a test." But they are certainly developing, and we know now. We remote view the fact that they're developing at least atomic mines, underwater mines, against U.S. subs. We know that as remote viewers, and we know that they're going to pop a nuke in anger because that event was so big. It's not a little epiphenomenon like a baseball game or something like that. It's a big event in history. We're not prophets. We're not prophesying. We're just using remote viewing to look that way in a particular direction at the particular topic, and it's just like turning your telescope onto and focusing it onto a particular target and studying it. That's what we do. We choose the targets.
The North Korean prediction appears capable of coming to pass any year now. But there is another event that remote viewers fear the most, a sign that the kill shot is imminent.
What would be that final recognizable event just prior to the kill shot sequence? The best that we could come up with, pushing ahead, the best that we could come up with was what appeared to be a space shuttle being forced down by what appears to be a meteor shower or something like that. For those of you who are not remote viewers, let me give you a little bit of insight into what remote viewing is in terms of a skill set. Most of the information that we derive from a target is in terms of word idea concepts. patterns of information that we perceive and turn into search our memory for words and apply those words, a written word on a piece of paper, and move on. The information we had that led us to believe that we're dealing with a space shuttle as a final precursor event to space shuttle coming down, as a final precursor event to the kill shot, was a collection of those rough sketches. So analytically, we're saying it looks like a space shuttle coming down.
As a result, there had been some confusion by not only the public, but also many remote viewers. The session sketches generated had resulted in the assumption that the craft being forced down was a U.S. space shuttle, since it was unique to the world at the time of the prediction.
Our sketches and drawings look like the current, very similar to the current U.S. space shuttle vehicles. There are some variations among viewers too, but we know that the Air Force has another program now, a nascent program. I think it's a spy vehicle that's up there, a maneuverable vehicle. That particular vehicle also looks like the U.S. space shuttle, the manned space shuttles.
Today, the recent U.S. space shuttle design is being emulated by many different space agencies around the globe, both government-oriented and private. No longer is the design unique to the U.S. space program, but the precursor itself remains the same. When a shuttle-like craft is forced down from orbit, the kill shot will begin.
When you see these particular events happen, that last one in particular, we don't know how much longer it will be until the kill shot, because mind is outside of time. The best that we could do is say this event is the last big one that you'll see as remote viewers before this kill shot sequence happens. Regardless of how long it is, that period between this shuttle event and the beginning of the kill shot sequence, we know as viewers, and I have personally viewed this particular event on a number of times because it's so powerful, that all of these warring parties that we see on the planet, all these many wars, that on the ground, all of these soldiers look up in the sky. They all look up. So something is happening in the sky. In fact, there's probably unprecedented atmospheric effects that in a recorded history, perhaps an unrecorded history, there's been events like this, but nothing in recorded history. Something happens in the atmosphere that has not been seen before, because all these soldiers are looking up, and then they go home. Their priorities change. They go home. So that's when it starts. This kill shot sequence will cripple communications worldwide. It will take out satellite communications in a very short order. Power grids, we're all aware of what it will do to power grids and what it has done in the past, and in certain instances, go back and check it out. Power grids will go down. There's many people over many months of time, and throughout the world will have no power. There are cities without power and communication. You can figure out for yourself what that will mean too. Not only will you not be able to pump gas, not only will you not be able to pump water, not only will there not be food on the shelves because there would be no gas in the trucks to take the food to the cities, but I could go on and on. You can figure the rest out for yourself. That's why this concept of sanctuary, knowing where to go with your last tank of gas, is so important. There are some tangential effects that we're picking up also as remote viewers, and have picked up over the years. Apparently, the center of the Earth, the core of the Earth, is changing rapidly as an effect of what is happening on the sun. And if that's the case, then we're probably looking at, as an adjunct to effect to the kill shot sequence, we're probably looking at massive volcanism and earthquakes as well. And I think it's very important to point out, and very important indeed, because of the adiabatic heating of the atmosphere, we're going to have very high winds in many parts of the Earth. The the sky, the sun, the light will be obscured. It will be very difficult to grow crops on a surface because of both winds and lighting conditions. Solar physicists were chewing their nails because they were very, very concerned that the sun had been very quiet for so long, and this was not predictable. And so because it was not predicted, it did not follow the solar cycle. So because it was not predicted, it did not follow the solar cycle. They were afraid that the sun might be doing something erratic. And that's when we began to see in the press and the news all these warnings about what major solar flares would do to the planet, to communications, to power grids, etc. And then in the last few months, we've seen that the sun's been relatively quiet. And now the scientists are saying, well, maybe the sun is going into a long period, years of quiescence. It's going to quiet down, and that's what we're seeing. And that might create global cooling. That may be why there's been the storms, snowstorms have been so severe, because the sun's quieter and not as active. Folks, it's the calm before the storm. It is the calm before the storm. The kill shot effects, and these will come and go, but the massive damage, first of all, will be to communications. Communications satellites, military satellites as well, will go down. We're not talking about single event latch-ups where you have a couple of semiconductors go bad. No, these things will be fried. Anybody in space, whether you're inside that little leaded shield on a space station or not, you're fried. You're in bad shape. You're going to die. Okay. So communication, power grids. Power grids, when they go down, folks, when the sun takes the power grids down, it's done it before. This time they won't go back up. It'll be months and months, if not years, to get power grids back up and running. There's going to be no power. Okay, so you'll need some. If you live in a place where it's going to be cold, you're going to need fuel to stay warm. So there's a lot of planning to do, folks. I would encourage you to start now, if not yesterday. I also want to point out that there's going to be most probably unprecedented geophysical events when this kill shot sequence starts. Earth can only take so much of protons hitting its magnetosphere, and on top of that, you're going to have X-rays that will be at Earth in 10 minutes, right? Now, we don't know how powerful those X-rays will be, but we do know that those protons will be extremely powerful, that mass from the sun. So we're looking at anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, perhaps, sometimes longer, depending on the velocity of the flare itself, before that actually impinges upon Earth's atmosphere and begins to heat it up. When the heating occurs, after that's done, that's when the power grids begin to go down. That's the X-rays themselves will take out satellites if they're powerful X-ray flares.
The kill shot, a series of devastating solar flares that will strike Earth, will cause the loss of all global GPS and communication systems. Power grids for entire regions and countries will fail. There will be unprecedented regional heating and atmospheric effects. But what parts of the world will be affected the most? And what areas do remote viewers see as survivable?
This is not to say, I want to presage, I want to caveat what I'm about to say and qualify it with this. Just because we have not seen sanctuaries out of the thousands of individual sanctuary remote viewing sessions and projects that work, just because we've not seen sanctuaries in some of the places I will outline, does not mean there are none there. I'm just saying a pattern has emerged that says the following. South America. We found no sanctuaries in South America or Latin America. We have found, additionally, very few sanctuaries in the entire southern hemisphere, including Australia and New Zealand, with some exceptions in Australia and 1 or 2 exceptions in New Zealand. Almost all of the sanctuary locations are in the northern hemisphere. For Europe, a number of sanctuaries for Europe, but almost without exception, they are all in generally northern Europe, but not too far north. So we're looking at certain places in Austria, Poland, all the way through Russia. But it's important to know that all of these sanctuary locations, almost without exceptions, are small locales that are distant, fairly distant from population centers or separated geographically by mountain ranges or bodies of water from large population density centers. And you know as well as I do that how many people do not have the option to move. Even if they knew where a sanctuary was, even if they knew where their own personal survival zone was, they don't have the option to move. For those people, here are the very, very essential things that you're going to need to try to sit this out. Fresh water is critical. You must have fresh water because it will be in short supply almost worldwide, not all over the world, but in many places, very short supply, critical. As much access to fresh water as possible. If you happen to live next to fresh water, clean fresh water, you're lucky. That's the best condition to live in. Obviously, food. You're going to have food. Everybody now feels that something's coming down. Economically and globally, it has nothing to do with the kill shot. That's just economics alone. Food supply is already short, and food is expensive and going to be more expensive. But it will be absent. There will be no access to food once the kill shot sequence starts. You'll have to have stored food. Shelter. You need to have shelter, as you know. And you're going to need to protect yourself. You can't do this alone. People need people. You'll have to band together as communities, hopefully, and for self-protection and to help each other through this. Remote viewing in terms of forecasting and predicting remember, it's different. Remote viewing is direct knowledge. In this case, kill shot case, we're perceiving an event and we're downloading data, period. You can take that or leave it. Do whatever you want with the information. I feel that it's important in terms of a public service to put that info out, like we did in the case of a global economic collapse. When gold was $230, I told the public on national radio, it's going to $2,000. Everybody laughed at that. They laughed at the Japanese quake. In fact, the Japanese public were so scared they didn't want to believe that something like that would ever happen. A nuclear reactor breaking. Those kinds of things. We've got a track record here. It's scary. It scares me. I want to be in denial sometimes about the very information I download. I don't want to believe it, and yet I have to. I have no choice. But I sure don't want to think about it. But I'm going to have to. It's going to be forced down my throat sooner than not. An important consideration, and let's not kid ourselves, you can imagine how many emails I receive and how many people walk up to me and say, Ed, I believe that this is going to happen based upon your past predictions and based upon my own remote viewing. But my family and friends think I'm bonkers, or they're not going to accept this, or they're angry at me for talking about it. What should I do? I always have the same answer. It's just what I would do the same thing too, and do the same thing. Identify your own sanctuary location. Identify it. Recon it and become familiar with the area. Take some time off from work. If you're lucky enough to have a job under this administration, take some time off from work. Go and familiarize yourself with this place, this small town or village or wherever it is, and know how far it is to drive, or if you have to get on a plane, how long it will take to get there, etc. I said, because when this sequence starts and there's no commo, and there's no electricity, no power, and there's no water, etc., then your friends and your family will believe you. But if you do not have your affairs in order and have not identified this safe zone by then, you're still screwed. So do it quietly, do it alone, let them continue. There's no need to continue the discussion. Just tell them it's a hobby. Identify this place to go to. That way when they're scared to death, you can say, honey, let's go. Take the kids and let's go. Call your brother and sister later, when we get there, and if you can call at all, or tell them where we are going so they can come too. Do that. In my career, I was a science and technology intelligence officer, so I've had a career briefing and working with some of the best scientists and engineers in the world, especially in my own country. And I've seen skepticism in all fields, so I'm perfect. It's easy to understand skeptics, and frankly, if I were not a remote viewer, and Ed Dames or somebody like me came up to me and told me about this, I wouldn't believe him. How could you? This thing is so disastrous to even think about. Why even think about it? You don't want to hear stuff like this. The world's a difficult, some places, many places, grim enough place to live now. Who wants to hear about the end of days and being fried by El Sol? So I'm perfectly sympathetic with the skeptics. There's an additional point that I really need to make. I really need to make this because there's so much confusion in the public eye about remote viewing and remote viewing predictions compared with the end of the world type of prognostications that we see all over the place too. We're not saying, as professional remote viewers, that the kill shot sequence is the end of the world. We're saying it's the end of life on Earth as we know it, probably. But it's not the end of the world. There's still going to be humans alive on this planet that are going to have to rebuild after the sun goes back to normal, which it will. We don't know how long that will be.
Near-future predictions will continue to be provided by Major Ed Dames as we approach the kill shot, including upcoming disease outbreaks, natural disasters, and economic changes. As these precursor events arise, Ed Dames and his team will be there, looking over the horizon of time, revealing safe havens, and providing warning to all who will listen.
And you know, Ed, all those years ago when you forecast these very gloomy things, how could we know that here we are, all these years later, and damned if it doesn't look just about as gloomy as you forecast it would be, or at least we're on the cusp of so many things that you forecast that are beginning to come true now.